Here I will try and explain a very important concept of the research which had been going on for years, and it is called, I named it as zero loss technique or strategy. So let's talk about that a little bit. Uh, Here I will try and demonstrate different scenarios later, but one can take a look at this, that if you are looking into an investment of 25,000 and you are spreading it over 4 days, that means your 25,000 is spread into 4 days. You are investing around 6,200 per day, with a say you can take an this is the 2000 factor which I will be talking about in a bit, but this is the amount of risk you are willing to take. Say for example, if you are taking a risk of $2,000 and the stock price is say $20, then what you're doing is basically you are buying C27, just a second, C27 divided by D27, you are buying 100 shares. Now if the scenario happens that you are this particular stock which you bought for $2,000 as your potential risk, in terms of every stock you took, turns out to be zero, which is very, very unlikely in the strategy. At that point, you might be losing this amount, which is D27 minus F27 times, I'm trying to explain it to you here, times E27. So at that point you are losing $2,000. So my question is why we call it as a zero loss technique, because the scenario of $20 share, a share which costs $20, for that to go to zero is practically very unlikely. I have not seen any stock prices which went to zero. So having said that, if you are buying or if you're willing to take a risk of $2,000, as I just showed it here, for that $2,000 you're buying a $20 share. For that share to be zero, you are buying 100 shares, of course, for that, with that price, and that share to be zero is very unlikely. So the loss of $2,000 is almost next to impossible. So that's why I call it as a zero loss technique. So what happens is basically here, if you are taking this 25,000 investment of yours and spreading it over a risk factor of $2,000, you can even make it 3,000. So for example, you want to do 3,000, you would be probably looking at 2 recommendations per day. Per month it would be around 44 recommendations, which I have just spoken about earlier. But if you are doing 2 recommendations per day and having a loss of 3,000, so which is basically, if I put here as 3,000 for a share price which was around 20,000, you have invested around 150 stocks or 150 shares. What is the probability? So that's where I feel, where a lot of my investors and a lot of my members found this as an interesting theory, that a stock price, for it to go to zero for any stock, is very, very unlikely. So that's why it's called a zero loss strategy, and that makes the whole methodology fall in place. So and that all depends on how much money you are willing to invest and how much risk you are going to take on a stock which could be zero. So in my scenarios, and I will explain to you later, I have never got into this situation where I'm losing money. But as I have shown on the breakouts also, that on my previous presentations with breakouts, that you may only lose time but not money. You will only lose money when the stock price is zero. So this is one of the key criterias of the methodology and best practices. But what it means is you also need to have sufficient amount of recommendations to make it to an ROI which you're looking around here. So there are two types of ROIs which you are looking at on line 24. One coming from automated trading, which is roughly around 25% a year, and the other one is based on target price, which is 45%. How this is happening is all based out of this strategy and research, where most of the recommendations are hitting 30% of the recommendations are hitting the stock price, I mean hitting the target price within a day. I would say around 55% of them are hitting the target price within 7 to 30 days, and 90% of them of sorry 15% of them are over 90 days. So if you concentrate on the first line itself, you are rotating 30% of your investment every day within a day. So that means if you take a look at here, you are talking about the investment which is rotating for you. If you take a look at here, a bulk of it is generating returns for you from the first slab itself. So it is very important in this research, which had been going on for years, as how fast I can identify a breakout and how quickly I can leverage from it with the target price. So there is constant optimization going on behind these predictive models to identify these breakouts and hit the target price as soon as possible. The idea being is to generate the maximum returns from here. So I will keep on talking more about this, but this is where I wanted to focus on zero loss technique, that unless a stock price of $20, which I am showing here as an example, gets to zero, you're not going to lose any money.